Once upon a time, in the very middle of a large kingdom there was a town, and in the town a palace, and in the palace a king. This king had one son, whom his father thought was wiser and cleverer than any son was ever before. And indeed his father had spared no pains to make him so. He had been very careful in choosing his tutors and governors when he was a boy, and when he became a youth, he sent him to travel, so he might see the ways of other people and find that they were often as good as his own. It was now a year since the prince had returned home, for his father felt that it was time that his son should learn how to rule the kingdom, which would one day be his. But during his long absence, the prince seemed to have changed his character altogether. From being a merry and light-hearted boy, he'd grown into a gloomy and thoughtful man. The king knew nothing that could have produced such an alteration. He vexed himself about it from morning till night, till at length an explanation occurred to him. The young man was in love. Now, the prince never talked about his feelings. For the matter of that, he scarcely talked at all, and his father knew that if he was to come to the bottom of the prince's dismal face, he would have to begin. So one day, after dinner, he took his son by the arm and led him into another room, hung entirely with the pictures of beautiful maidens, each one more lovelier than the other. "My dear boy," he said, "you are very sad. Perhaps after all your wanderings, it is dull for you here all alone with me. It would be much better if you would marry, and I have collected here the portraits of the most beautiful women in the world of a rank equal to your own. Choose which among them you would like for a wife, and I will send an embassy to her father to ask for her hand." "Alas, your majesty," answered the prince, "it is not love or marriage that makes me so gloomy, but the thought which haunts me day and night that all men, even kings, must die. Never shall I be happy again until I have found a kingdom where death is, and I have determined to give myself no rest till I have discovered the land of immortality." The old king heard him with dismay. Things were worse than he thought. He tried to reason with his son, and told him that during all these years he had been looking forward to his return in order to resign his throne and his cares which pressed so heavily upon him. But it was in vain that he talked. The prince would listen to nothing, and the following morning buckled on his sword and set forth on his journey. He had been traveling for so many days, and had left his fatherland behind him. When close to the road, he came upon a huge tree. In its topmost bough an eagle was sitting, shaking the branches with all his might. This seemed strange, and so unlike an eagle, that the prince stood still with surprise, and the bird saw him and flew to the ground. The moment its feet touched the ground, he changed into a king. "Why do you look so astonished?" he asked. "I was wondering how you shook the bow so fiercely," answered the prince. "I am condemned to do this, for neither I nor any of the kindred men can die till I have rooted up this great tree," replied the king of the eagles. "But it is now evening. I need work no more today. Come to my house with me, and be my guest for the night." The prince accepted gratefully the eagle's invitation, for he was tired and hungry. They were received at the palace by the king's beautiful daughter, who gave orders that the dinner should be laid for him at once. While they were eating, the eagle questioned his guest about his travels, and if he was wandering for pleasure's sake, or with any special aim. Then the prince told him everything, and how he could never return back till he discovered the land of immortality. "Dear brother," said the eagle, "you have discovered it already, and it rejoices my heart to think that you will stay with us. Have you not just heard me say that death has no power either over myself or any of my kindred till the great tree is rooted up? It'll take me 600 years' hard work to do that. So marry my daughter, and let us all live happily together here. After all, 600 years is an eternity." "Ah, dear king," replied the young man, "your offer is very tempting, but at the end of 600 years we should have to die, so we should be no better off. No, I must go on till I find the country where there is no death at all." Then the princess spoke and tried to persuade the guest to change his mind, but he sourly shook his head. At length, seeing that his resolution was firmly fixed, she took him a cabinet, a little box which contained her picture, and gave it to him, saying, "As you will not stay with us, Prince, accept this box, which will sometimes recall us to your memory. If you are tired of traveling before you come to the land of immortality, open this box and look at my picture, and you'll be borne along either on earth or in the air, quick as thought, or as swift as the whirlwind." The prince thanked her for the gift, which he placed in his tunic, and sorrowfully bade the eagle and his daughter farewell. Never was any present in the world was as useful as that little box, and many times he did bless the kind thought of the princess. One evening it had carried him to the top of a high mountain, where he saw a man with a bald head, busily engaged in digging up spadefuls of earth and throwing them into a basket. When the basket was full, he took it away and returned with an empty one, which likewise he filled. The prince stood and watched him for a little while, till the bald-headed man looked up and said to him, "Dear brother, what surprises you so much?" "I was wondering why you were filling the basket," replied the prince. "Oh," replied the man, "I am content to do this, for neither I nor any of my family can die till I have dug away the whole of this mountain and made it level with the plain. But come, it is almost dark, and I shall work no longer." And he plucked a leaf from a tree close by, and from a rough digger he was changed into a stately bald-headed king. "Come home with me," he added. "You must be tired and hungry, and my daughter will have some supper ready for us." The prince accepted gladly, and they went back to the palace, where the bald-headed king's daughter, who was still more beautiful than the other princess, welcomed them at the door, and led the way into a large hall and to a table covered with silver dishes. While they were eating, the bald-headed king asked the prince how he had happened to wander so far, and the young man told him all about it, and how he was seeking the land of immortality. "You have found it already," answered the king, "for, as I said, neither I nor my family can die till I level this great mountain, and that will take 800 years longer. Stay here with us, and marry my daughter. 800 years is surely long enough to live." "Oh, certainly," answered the prince, "but all the same I would rather go and seek the land where there is no death at all." So next morning he bade them farewell, though the princess begged him to stay with all her might, and when she found that she could not persuade him, she gave him a remembrance, a golden ring. This ring was still more useful than the box, because one wished oneself at any place was there directly, without even the trouble of flying it through the air. The prince put it on his finger, and thanking her heartily, went his way. He walked on for some distance, and then he recollected that the ring, and thought he would try if the princess had spoken truly as its powers. "I wish I was at the end of the world," he said, shutting his eyes. And when he opened them, he was standing in a street full of marble palaces. The men who passed him were tall and strong, and their clothes were magnificent. He stopped some of them and asked in all the 27 languages he knew what the name of the city, but no one could answer him. Then his heart sank within him. What should he do in the strange place if nobody could understand anything he said? Suddenly his eyes fell upon a man dressed after the fashion of his native country, and he ran up to him and spoke to him in his own tongue. "What city is this, my friend?" he inquired. "It's the capital city of the Blue Kingdom," replied the man. "But the king himself is dead, and his daughter is now the ruler." With this news the prince was satisfied, and begged his countryman to show him the way to the young queen's palace. The man led him through several streets into a large square, one side of which was occupied by a splendid building that seemed borne up on slender pillars of soft green marble. In front was a flight of steps, and on these the queen was sitting, wrapped in a veil of shining silver mist, listening to the complaints of her people and dealing out justice. When the prince came up, she saw directly that he was no ordinary man, and telling her chamberlain to dismiss the rest of her petitioners for that day, she signed to the prince to follow her into the palace. Luckily, she had been taught his language as a child, so they had no difficulty in talking together. The prince told all his story and how he was journeying in search of the land of immortality. When he had finished, the queen, who had listened attentively, rose, and taking his arm, led him to the door of another room, the floor of which was entirely made of needles, stuck so close together that there was not room for a single needle more. "Prince," she said, turning to him, "you see these needles? Well, know that neither I nor any of my family can die till I have worn out these needles in sewing. It will take at least 1,000 years for that. Stay here and share my throne. 1,000 years is long enough to live." "Certainly," answered he. "Still, at the end of the 1,000 years, I should have to die. No, I must find the land where there is no death." The queen did all she could do to persuade him to stay, but as her words proved useless, at length she gave it up. Then she said to him, "As you will not stay, take this little golden rod as a remembrance of me. It has the power to become anything you wish it to be, when you are in need." So the prince thanked her, and putting the rod in his pocket, went his way. Scarcely had he left the town behind him when he came to a broad river which no man might pass, for he was standing at the end of the world, and this was the river which flowed around it. Not knowing what to do next, he walked a little distance up the bank, and there, over his head, a beautiful city was floating in the air. He longed to get to it, but how? Neither road nor bridge was anywhere to be seen, yet the city drew him upwards, and he felt that here at last was the country which he sought. Suddenly he remembered the goldenrod which the mist-veiled queen had given him. With a beating heart he flung it to the ground, wishing with all his might that it should turn into a bridge, and fearing that, after all, this might prove beyond its power. But no, instead of the rod, there stood a golden ladder, leading straight up to the city of the air. He was about to enter the golden gates, when there sprang at him a wondrous beast, whose like he had never seen. "Out sword from the sheath!" cried the prince, springing back with a cry, and the sword leapt from the scabbard, and cut off some of the monster's heads, but others grew again directly, so that the prince, pale with terror, stood where he was, calling for help, and put his sword back in the sheath again. The queen of the city heard the noise, and looked from her window to see what was happening. Summoning one of her servants, she bade him go and rescue the stranger, and bring him to her. The prince thankfully obeyed her orders, and entered her presence. The moment she looked at him, the queen also felt that he was no ordinary man, and she welcomed him graciously, asked him what brought him to the city. In answer, the prince told all his story, and how he had traveled long and far in search of the land of immortality. "You have found it," said she, "for I am the queen over life and over death. Here you can dwell among the immortals." 1,000 years had passed since the prince first entered the city, but they had flown so fast that the time seemed no more than 6 months. There had not been one instant of the 1,000 years that the prince was not happy, till one night when he dreamed of his father and mother. Then the longing for his home came upon him with a rush, and in the morning he told the queen of the immortals that he must go and seek his father and mother once more. The queen stared at him with amazement and cried, "Why, prince, are you out of your senses? It is more than 800 years since your father and mother died.